First, I'd just like to apologize for what I'm going to ask you to do on today's episode of What's Wrong with the Men. Please go read the Goon Squad article in Harper's. I wasn't going to talk about this article on here originally, but I have not been able to get it out of my head since I read it 2 weeks ago. And then it came up again in Derek Thompson's piece that I talked about yesterday, which to me feels like a sign that I should actually talk about it. Part of the reason this piece is difficult to discuss is that even the vocabulary used to accurately describe what it is examining is potentially flaggable. So we're going to let vague terms like adult material or esoteric words like onanism do a lot of the lifting here. But in case you're still not clear, essentially what this 7,500 piece of serious journalism concerns is young men who are so addicted to the 5-knuckle shuffle that they spend like 3 to 8 hours a day consuming adult material and strangely finding a sense of community in the process. Now, before you say this is all just much ado about nothing, I've always been a champion for free speech. I love daring media that pushes boundaries, and I've grown up relatively unconvinced that adult material poses that much threat to men or society as a whole. To be clear, the Gooners discussed in this article are not indicative of the average young man, but just like how the majority of men can play video games in moderation or make the occasional sports gambling bet without developing habit, there are still increasing numbers of young men who are becoming addicted to these screen-based dopamine hits. In the case of adult material, well, the Gooners are getting addicted in a domain that every single man you know has some experience in. But the material they are consuming is not your grandfather's hidden copy of Hustler. It is something far more extreme and certainly addictive. Look, the rivers of empathy I feel for the young men featured in this article are only dwarfed by the oceans of concern I have that they are fundamentally misspending their lives. And no, it's not for me to say how someone should or shouldn't necessarily spend their life, but I think my concern is rooted in my belief that the way they are misspending theirs is not necessarily entirely a result of their own choices or in their control, but instead a downstream response to how the brain's chemistry is rewired if you give a 10, 11, 12-year-old with puberty hormones rushing through their brain, unlimited access to the internet, and all of the material on it. Now we look at a bunch of those 10, 11, 12-year-olds who are 23, 24, 25-year-old men and are addicted to hours of short-form, mindless adult material content, not forming real relationships in the real world. And likely, even if some adult material can be harmless or depict intimacy in a realistic way, consuming versions of it that are extreme, misogynistic, degrading, and in no way healthy in terms of learning how to interact with people. And look, this is just one article about one specific subset, but I think on this topic, when it's so tied up with like shame and privacy and something that people don't want to talk about, the problem is actually probably much worse than reported. Anyways, these are just my thoughts, but I think in order to help men and make like this problem better for all of us, we probably need to have a conversation about this thing that we all grew up adjacent to and actually having like a grounded conversation about the health impacts of it. Go read the article and make up your own mind.